So our next speaker, as I told you, someone who I love hearing speak. So Dr. Gyani, I'm just going to say I do. And I'm just calling you by my name. I always joke with him and call him Dr. G, and he's going to tell me, don't call me doctor, but I am. So Gyani is going to be talking to us on revisiting personal development and career growth in a post-pandemic reality, which I think is incredible. And I think for me, he's very involved in the family business. He's the co-founder and CEO, for those of you who don't know, of Maestro Antonio Group of companies. And he's also the director of Cole Rossi, which is a marketing strategy consultancy. So he really comes with an absolute huge and different understanding and background of business. And he was appointed the Chief Strategy Officer for Bidvest Catering Services in 2020. So his doctorate that he holds is actually from Vinci, and he's one of our incredible alumni that we absolutely love to engage with. But his sustainable personal development and career growth was an aspect of his doctoral studies, and also something that he holds very dear in terms of this. He's received numerous awards and accolades, including, which I love, is a knighthood, and I don't think it's a Knight of the Order of the Merit of the Italian Republic, and I won't be able to pronounce it correctly, but it is actually given as a decree of the President of Italy. And I think for me, he also was our PhD Excellence Award winner for academic excellence and the Mandala Research Award winner. So I think if you know this about how difficult these awards are, it's really quite amazing. But you will see on the script that we sent just how many other awards he's received, and yet he remains one of the most humble people I've ever met, contributing to the fields of education, arts, and culture. I can phone Gyani any time of the day and ask him for assistance or help, and he will go above and beyond. So I can think of no more better representative for Da Vinci as an alumnus and also the guest speaker today. Over to you, Gyani.
Thank you, Marla. What can I say? I'm humbled and really, it's fantastic to be here. It's a privilege, and I'm going to ask if I can share my screen, but I will leave my camera on in the meantime. Just to say hello, and then I'll put the slides on, and then after my talk, when it's question time, I will put my face back on. But I think there are quite a few slides, and just to contextualize what I'm doing, there's absolutely, just to qualify, there's no race-based, politics-based, there's no agendas other than for me to keep this kind of postdoctoral study going, and in doing that, it motivates me in a way that I cannot explain. And I think that within that context, I'm going to put forward some thoughts, and I'm hoping that the thoughts at least will trigger some reaction, and then I can take it on further with your approval. So I feel a little bit like Jackie. Jackie, I was there not so long ago. And your study is very exciting because it reminds me a lot of mine. Mine had to do with restaurants, and it had to do with career paths and personal growth. And I also interviewed people in that. So I remain available to you at any time if you need any input at all. Thanks. So in 2016 was when I did my with my PhD. And funny enough, when I did my defense, I ended off with this statement by Churchill on this is not the end and not even the beginning of the end, but perhaps the end of the beginning. And I thought it was apt to actually start with that. As I said, I'm going to throw a lot of concepts out there, and hopefully at the end, they'll all join the dots and we'll get a feeling of what it is that I'm trying to say. But every moment in time and whatever space we're in, the 4 Ps, as I called them, is perspective, proportion, priority, and purpose, play an important role in the way that we see ourselves, the environment and ourselves interchangeably. This is straight out of my PhD, and what I landed up developing this framework, which has 4 basic quadrants: foundation, core, pivot, and link. And I'm going to leave it there for now because I'll come back to that just now. And then purely out of grounded theory, this awareness spiral came out, whereby we start at the bottom of the spiral and we have awareness of something, then recognition, then knowledge, vision, motivation, into some sort of action, a reflection on that action, a reaction hopefully, and then ongoing resilience to keep going and have a new awareness. And this, together with the framework, kind of takes us to that as is and as it should be state that we see sometimes in chaos and those kind of things. But essentially, you start off down at the bottom, and you have some sort of idea of who you are, and then you get a new awareness, and then you recognize that you were aware of, and so on, and you get to the top where you then redefine who you are, and then the process carries on. So just bear these things in mind as I go forward. But the next important aspect, and fractals are very complicated and mathematical systems that I cannot say that I've mastered in terms of the mathematics, but in terms of the philosophy and the visual aspects of fractals, I'm very comfortable. And so a shape that can be broken into smaller parts, each echoing the whole. So if you think of an organogram of a small business, and you've got an owner and a manager and a supervisor and an administrator, whatever it might be, and these are just taken off the net, so please don't read anything more into these. And fractals, then, you can see this, the triangle becoming kind of a Magen David, and then becoming a more complicated one, and so on, but that triangle remaining there. So what if your company or your organization has an organogram that looks something like that? How do you perceive it, and how do you make sure that the smallest element is also a representation of the whole? It could get worse. Your company could look like that, or your organization, or your family tree, or the country. They could all acquire these different shapes. And in order to lead or to be a part of, so to lead, to be a part of, to lead a certain segment of it, that sense of understanding where you fit and where everything fits around you becomes quite critical. And I think that in my continued study, and this is going to carry on until I publish something, this understanding gets complicated when you see the actual different kind of organizations. And organization, they're not meaning a structured place, but organizing of parts around each other. If we are going to insist, as we do often, to say that the integrity would be that, as Jackie would have said, the cleaner should have the same ethos and daily kind of motivation as the CEO, how do you then, if you're the leader or the action man or the person or the action lady, how do you get a sense of what it is that is around you, and how do you then transmit communications that are going to land up at the far reaches of this unit that you are running? And then also, how are you going to get the communication from the unit to come back to you so that you can ensure that the integrity is fine? Now this, funny enough, is also a fractal shape, and it could look like that. So you could be going to work every day or walking in a country called South Africa, and the shape of the country is actually like this. And occasionally, when we win a World Cup or whatever, the fractal elements come together and everyone comes back. But coming back to this now, I've just repeated this slide. If you just take one of the units right at the bottom and play kind of, it's a maze to get to the pinnacle at the top, or however the shape is, the importance of recognizing a morphing I becomes something that helps you kind of cope with this logic, to say, well, I am that little hexagonal shape in gray on the left, and then if I become part of a team, then I will pop into there with other people, and hopefully the shape of the team will have the same characteristics as I have and the other people in my team. And if the team then becomes part of a group, it'll keep the shape. And if the group becomes part of an organization, it keeps the shape. And then in some instances, you'll see the organization and you'll be seeing a small I again. So it's a kind of a universe or a galaxy, as we begin to call it in my conversations lately. Having a look at this, we can get a sense that if we want to make a difference, one way or the other, if we start on the right eye, which is the organization, and we want to make a difference to that individual, in Jackie's case, the cleaner, how do we do that? And if we want the cleaner then to make a difference to the organization, how do we do that? How do we influence and get feedback cycles going what frameworks and organizational grams do we use, what we take out of the economy systems and rising levels of consciousness. Yesterday I watched a fantastic talk, if anyone wants to watch it, between John Elkann, who's the head of Fiat, and Elon Musk on the future. And it's amazing how the permeation of language, such as philosophy and the softer issues, is becoming daily bread for business people that we would have never thought that would think in those lines. And I think this is where qualitative, quantitative, all these different aspects we can look at. I haven't changed this model. It came straight out of my paper, but you can see, and there's a fantastic book by Robert Sapolsky, which is called Behave, and I don't know if anyone's read it, but he basically looks at the actions of a person and what motivates those 1 second before the person behaves in a certain way, and then he looks at the nurture part, and then he looks at the heritage part. So it's like taking every aspect of why you acted at a moment in time and integrating it. And in a way, I'm trying to do that here by saying, when we look at this and say, how have we, and I've been doing these studies now since 2016, and I've been privileged with my own company and with the people at Bidvest that they've allowed me some freedom to use our environment just to populate my thoughts. At the moment, they're just thoughts, and as I say, I'll be happy for any feedback. But if we took what we did with I, and this is what came out of my paper, and we take each of these quadrants. So if I say, first of all, I am, and I see that there's a physical, emotional, and a spiritual element to me, and then what do I have to put in order to get something out of this? And the outer circles are consistency and exercise for the physical, self-belief and meditation for emotional, and faith and prayer if you are spiritual. And the point is that those can all interact, and that's why there are those infinity curves around them. At the same time, there's a part of me that's related to family, friends, and community. And again, in order for those to thrive, you would need support and trust and recreation and appreciation and culture and loyalty, etc. And then there's a link that says, okay, I need to improve myself. So there's intellect, communication, and development, which means study, focus, research, relevance, discovery, awareness, all those aspects. Now, each and every person in an organization will have these. These are personal characteristics. They're nothing, it's not rocket science, but seeing it is the key. And I was so excited when Jackie said that the lady said, I wish I was seen. And seeing people in a context of this becomes very important. And finally, there's what people do every day in order to better their life, which is professional, financial, and societal, so that you would then have timing, patience, and effort, and work, investment, and trade, all interchanging around those at some stage, so that you would emancipate the person. And then, so I'm saying, so a person, and we looked at people, when I did my study, we looked at people in restaurants, and I had my father and another chap as the models, and they were both from rural areas. These people from rural areas who had very basic educations landed up years later, having worked in the environment of restaurants, having, without the school of life, without night school, without any formal training, developed a whole lot of skills that had to do with numeracy, literacy, and not in one language, and business skills and communication skills. And normally then you'd look at the next generation of person, and you'd find that the generation after that were mainly people who had then gone to university or studied or tried to get a more formal kind of career. And I've always said, the restaurant business is not something you do when you're a student or when you retire. It's everything that happens in between. But the point about the study was that people emancipate as a result of many factors, and the factors are all in that framework. So we looked at this and said, okay, well then how does this apply to a company? And so we looked at something that we call the inside, outside, in perspective. Because you need to, as I showed you in that first kind of spider-shaped organogram, you need to make sure that the actual lifeblood of communication from the periphery comes into the center and in between all the elements, and then it can go the other way. So what we did then is to redefine that framework that we made, or that I created for the individual, and I redefined it so that it applied to companies. So if you look at cause and link and pivot and that, in terms of an organization, you would have the vision, the mission, the essence of what this organization is, positioning for that organization, motivating factors or motivation and management. And again, you would have to have trust and ethos, a core business, enhancing lives, goal orientation, happy stakeholders, providers, to become the provider of choice of a service or a product, of excellence, of loyalty, of inspiration, mentorship, etc. And then if you go to the core elements, you would have to have critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication, target market, and stakeholders, and those come with their own related duties and responsibilities and rights. I guess one could call them that, but they're the factors that keep this alive, including what I've written there. And I don't like reading every single thing, but you can see problem solving, exploration, and these things are interchangeable. You've got to be clear and concise, etc. And then finally, if you take the link side, you would have IP, systems, protocols, innovation, R&D, and training. And so all of these, with protection and confidentiality, obviously, for your IP and so on, they're all logical, but it's the way that we look at them that matters. These are the pivot, and the pivot are finance, society, environment, and you can see this starting to come through. What excites me is that the term ESG has become the lingua franca of the business world at the moment, so that we look after the environment, look after society and governance. And credit to me, if I can, when I put this pivot together, I said you've got to look after society, environment, and it wasn't like I was reinventing the wheel, because we had the triple and quadruple bottom lines and all those things happening. But looking at it all in that way helps us to get a sense of where we fit into the whole. And again, you would have the as-is state of your organization, company, club, whatever it might be, all those elements playing a part, a new awareness, becoming recognition, knowledge, vision, motivation, action, and this thing will move quite quickly. So what we did was we went on a project to see how we could best ensure the integration of the information and reverse of that, to have people motivated by what was going on. So the first quadrant we called acquisition, because it was an acquisition of information from every employee in our organization. To go out there and say, what do you think our positioning is? Having explained what positioning is, and vision and mission, creating a matrix, all that kind of thing. We went and we acquired all that information. We then coded that information, by the way, which I think is some fun that you're going to have, Jackie, in terms of coding the transcribed interviews, which I think is fantastic. And then once we coded it, you start to realize what resources people need. So they get clarity as to their vision, mission, and what their daily kind of KPI or their KPA or the SLA, or whatever it might be. And you start looking at space and equipment and all that other set of resources that the people will need wherever they are in this structure of your organization or club, etc. And then we would have to have a look and see what the feedback areas would be, whereby we would benchmark, have job descriptions, make sure that we do training and development and have efficiencies, which made us then re-look the individual. But I'll come to that in a second. And then, of course, how could we make it more efficient by automation? Because innovation and having the ability to use IT, and everyone, again, apart from ESG, AI is everything that everyone's talking about. But in reality, we're just saying that we want to make jobs easier to do. There will still be jobs. So I created something called the column. And just to go through the column very quickly, when someone joins an organization, and for this example, let's use a company, and they join at level 1. And I'm sorry to use this example because I don't want to poach Jackie's theory, but if the person arrives in the food environment at level 1 and they are cleaners, in other words, they just have got only basic skills of taking a mop around the floor. And I'm not redefining cleaners or anything, please. It's to make a bigger example out of the thing that I'm saying this. And then after a few weeks, they learn the skills of mixing soaps, and all that type of thing. And then after another period, they may know the technicalities of using a dishwasher and switching it on and off and temperatures and that. And then they might help in peeling some fruits or potatoes or onions or something, and therefore acquire more skills. And then they might be able to make some meals, and then they might be able to run a kitchen. So in those simple terms, if you go along the y-axis, that's the development of the person. And if you go along the x-axis, it's time. So your first block at the bottom, the person might be going from a person who's just come off, he's an unemployed person who's come off the streets, and you put him in there and give them a job with an overall and that. And then you go along the x-axis and you say, okay, in a period of 2 years, we would like this person to ride that arrow that goes from the bottom left to the top right and reach a level of skill that can enable that person to go to level 2, bottom left again. And then in a number of years, make their way to level 3 and 4 and 5 and so on. Now, this awareness of the person and how you're going to train them enables you to do many things. And my argument later will close this loop that I've just opened. But the point is that the person comes into your environment and you are sensitized to developing that person. And at the moment that you develop the person and they leave level 1, you are then enabled and empowered to employ someone at level 1. So you don't have to go and look for somebody at level 5, because the guy who was at level 5 is going to get promoted into level, the guy who was at level 4 will go to level 5 and so on. So there's a movement up and down this column. We soon realized the challenges were more than just providing a job. So that if you look at the person one-dimensionally and say, hello, John, well, your job is to come here and clean this floor, and you have this kind of insensitive, I guess, and again, I'm not making political statements, I don't do politics or any of that stuff, but the point is that once you engage with John, and we have a thing called a Higg form, how's it going? And, you know, when it was doable, I would actually interview every single person once a year, which meant 1.5 per day, because when our company had 450 or so employees. And you soon realize that this person requires other aspects of development. And therefore, earlier on, Jackie was talking about poverty. And in my PhD, I actually looked at deficiency rather than poverty, because poverty gives you this idea that it's all financial. There is a poverty in many other aspects of life where people find that they are behind the wave. And we always use it in a very cliched way to say that the same wave, the same person, in front, you're surfing, behind, you're drowning. And so you still, while that person is working, it is responsibility of business or whoever, the country, to also ensure that they are developing personal development skills that have got to do with literacy, numeracy, culture, history, whatever it might be that they missed out on. And they go up that same level. And sometimes the two link in that you need to be able to then tie back to the job that you're expecting the person to do. The third one was personal finance. And, you know, little money or lots of money. Learning how to handle money. Learning not to fall into a black tax trap. Learning all these different things, I think, is also part. It's not offensive to say that if a person, and this is a global problem, as you will see in a couple of minutes, they need to develop those skills, and it's part of our job to develop them. And then finally, personal health, wellness, well-being, all these kind of, aspects of life that are just as important as everything else and require just as much development. Now, these are just 4 blocks. This thing could become a 10-sided column where you interface finance and medical care and all that type of thing. But at least you've got a holistic view of the person that's working for you. And we have to lose many more shackles than just the legal shackles that apartheid left us. It's the way you see the other person that is the ultimate problem that we have to overcome. And it's not just between races. This is within races. This is within old school ties. This is within the whole of society. But obviously, in our country, we have a legacy that is difficult to avoid. Finally, in terms of this section, the best teamwork, this is J.C. Penney, who started the biggest business in selling retail and that in the States, comes from individuals who work independently towards one goal. Okay, so we come back now to, let's call it the nation state. I apologize for my slide because it could have been more sophisticated in terms of identifying the nation state as the biggest group. And the way that an entity sees the world in itself, this perspective comes back. And COVID has arrived. And this is from the Harvard Business Review. But COVID has got a negative impact. But it also is a game changer that will create a kind of fractal for us in society. So I went and I just looked at a few of the reports that I could put into this talk, and I'm coming towards the end now. So if you take the World Economic Forum, they started something called the Great Reset in their last gathering. But if you look at the purple words, that's my kind of informal coding of what people are talking about. Stakeholder economy, equitable, sustainable, shared, societal healing. All of these are part of the language, okay? But there is also a crit. But I think these companies will be judged by what they did during the war, and they're calling it a war. How they treated their employees, suppliers, and customers, by who shared and who hoarded. And if we take, this came from a lady called Kathy Lee, also part of the World Economic Forum report, and Forbes criticizes it by saying that it's another example of wealthy and powerful elites saving their consciences with full efforts to help the masses. But the points that Kathy Lee makes are that education may have changed forever. The new hybrid format is probably here to stay in every way. 1.2 billion children worldwide have been affected by school closures. There's a critical issues relating to accessing technology and internet. And the pandemic can and will widen the divide. And I think that this is the awareness that we need to create. If we go in, and if we perceive South Africa as our overriding organogram, whether it's government, business, family, any interaction has to see the other person, and we need to work towards these issues. And you'll see why in a moment. So The Guardian has studied the impact on COVID on life expectancy across the globe, and it impacts it. It looks like nothing, but it takes away like half a year, 2 years in some cases, and sometimes even more. And what's more important, that there's no real end to the global impact. The World Bank instead has looked at health system disruptions, school closures, the effects on those three of income, price, and food, and impact on the poor. And the COVID has had a shock on the life cycle of people. And the World Bank, and this is a lead on to where I'm going, they identify conception to 5 years old, your school years, school to work and tertiary, working life, and being an older adult. So this was a fantastic paper in something called the Global Citizen. And it really looks at a call to action. But the sad comments are, when you look at South Africa, and now I'm honing in on our country, is that it's nice to talk globally and all that, and creating a world that is equal, and that I get it. But the reality is that when you're young in South Africa, it is hard to believe that you'll one day have a better life. Now, we've got youth unemployment between the ages of 15 to 24, or 55%, and we really have a call to action for everyone, private, civil, development partners, government, because if we look at the reality, the rude reality, that is difficult to talk about, because there's no excuse for apartheid, there's no excuse for any of those negative things like racism and all. But if you look at that when you're young in South Africa, it's hard to believe that you'll one day have a better life. If you study it carefully, you will find that that applies to every young person in this country, no matter their standing and no matter what, because our brain drain is alive and well, and our people that are in the country are also finding that they are challenged. And we need to respond to this. If European House Ambrosetti, same thing, identified the significant surge, instability, food security is a problem. 95 million people in extreme poverty. So granted, we've got, that's why your study is very important, Jackie, and I think that broadening it is not something that your supervisor is going to be happy that I'm saying, but in context, I think it's a very valuable look at a sample of what's going on throughout the world. And more importantly, and I'm coming to this, is that 80 million people are undernourished. Now, the fact that South Africa is the worst hit on the continent, well, we'll take that on the chin. So human capital is something that we speak about often. And we've had a lot of studies on human capital, and the World Bank, I went to a talk at the Wits Business School by the president of the World Bank about 3 years ago or so, and it brought to my attention and to the whole group, the cohort that went to listen to him, about human capital. But essentially there is an index, and it begins on probability of survival, expected years that you will be at school, harmonized test scores on how you do when you're at school, learning adjusted years of school, adult survival rates, and healthy growth being not stunted. Now, if it's your first time seeing this, then it will have the impact. If you've already seen it, it should still have the impact, because this is what happens in our country. What is the probability of survival to age 5 of a child born in our country? 97 out of 100 children survive to age 5, which is fine. How many years do we expect our kids to be at school? A person or a child who starts at age 4 can expect to complete 10.2 years of study by their 18th birthday. Our harmonized test scores are dismal. We score 343 on a scale where 625 represents advanced attainment and 300 is the minimum. How many learning adjusted years of school do we have? So now, notwithstanding the fact that you spend 10.2 years at school, you're getting 5.6 actual learning years. Now, this comes from the World Bank. And now there might be conspirators and whatever. I'm not interested. I take the facts for where they are, and then we go to test them on our own market. Adult survival rate, 69% of 15-year-olds will survive until age 60. Now, it's not just because my heritage is in food and I'm in the food business, but healthy growth is our biggest challenge. This chap from the World Bank had the same kind of stats, saying that 27 out of 100 children are so-called stunted, which means that in the first 1,000 years of their lives, they did not receive nutrition necessary to develop their brain physically. So 27% of the kids that are born today are doomed to an underdeveloped brain. Now, I'm not a doctor, but the guy had MRIs up to show what a stunted brain looks like and to show what a healthy brain looks like. And he made the point that, first of all, the non-growth is irretrievable. There's no catch-up here. And the way he put it, and it's embedded in my head, because he used euphemisms like I've never heard before. He says, people with a stunted brain will never quite understand the nuances of IT, mathematics, and the like. So they will be condemned to a kind of menial labor, if any, and this is not based only on color. This is across the whole. And at the same time, we have an unemployment rate that already includes these 27. Where should we be actually pointing our activities? But I'm really motivated, no matter what people may say, of a view that says it always seems impossible until it's done. We owe it to our kids, to their kids, and to the people of our country, of our companies, of our families, of our every single person we come into contact with, to recognize them within our fractal environment that is South Africa, and create this country in a way that we can start today, and in 3 years' time know that the kids that are out there are all going to be part of the catchment of the many, many talented geniuses. Thank you, and I'm happy for questions at any time.
Thank you so much, Gianni. I think that was an incredible presentation. I'm sure everyone will definitely agree with me. It was extremely inspiring. And I think you've added a lot of valuable points. And so I will open for questions, but what I'd like to do first is we've got our graphicist, Letta, who while you've been talking and Jackie's been talking, she's been illustrating what you have spoken about. So Letta comes, her company is called Three Stick Men, and she does really incredible graphics, and it is our gift to you and to Jackie of a reminder today. So Letta, over to you, and then I will open the floor to any questions for Gianni.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Coonan. All right, so this is what we've captured in the last couple of hours. We spoke about innovation to fast-track our economy, new processes, new systems. How do we allow people to come up with their own ideas, developing those township and rural economies, and the fact that we need more agile and fluid strategies. Then Jackie took us through her PhD upliftment of the working poor, specifically within the cleaning environment. She was talking about the fact that cleaners are earning low salaries. They're really struggling to make ends meet. 8% of people are in working poverty. It's very difficult to escape that, and that it's intergenerational. External influence is usually the only solution out of it. It's not a question of potential or laziness. We need to tap into those skills and the leadership quantities. What's come out of her research so far is that people need to be seen, help us to be seen and share those stories. We don't really need to develop our cleaners, do we? The whole idea around the corporate recruitment process is really perpetuating the status quo. She's talking about creating a competency framework for skills development, talking about personal competencies, technical skills, and the question of recognition of prior learning was also raised. The black tax issue coming in very, very clearly. How do we include a comparison to other countries, and how do we handle black tax specifically in this environment? You can see her research question there. What competency framework can be constructed for upliftment of the working poor within this particular industry? And then Dr. Gianni Mariano spoke about revisiting personal development and career growth in a post-pandemic reality. He spoke about perspective, proportion, priority, and purpose, and that awareness spiral, how that becomes real. The fractals breaking down into smaller bits. To lead within that fractal environment, you need to know where you fit in, and you need to know how to create a flow of communication. Recognize that I within that process. People develop complex skills through the experience. We've seen the foundation, the core, the link, and the pivot. And he brought that through into redefining the company identity framework as well, within that matrix of acquisition, resource allocation, performance, and automation. Building sustainable career paths means we have to focus on time, education, and training. And we really need to have an holistic view of the individual within the business, their development, their managing of the finance, their health, and their job. And if we think about the impact that COVID has made, COVID has created that great reset. Companies will be judged by what they do and what they did during the war. What really stood out for me is the fact that if you are a young person in South Africa at the moment, it's hard to believe that one day you'll have a better life. And he spoke to us about the Human Capital Index, the fact that 27% of our children will have, because they don't have nutrition, will have the stunted brains, which really impact on their potential to perform going forward. And the final thing that I picked up on what he said is we owe it to our children to create that future for them. So this is, in a couple of minutes, the visual summary of what we've spoken about in the last hour and a half. Dr. Coonan, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Letta. We will say goodbye to you, Letta. I do see, Gibson, you've got a question.
I would like to find out from the doctor. There's a concept called this economies of time compression. I know it's a concept that is more related to big industry, but when you break it down to the human level, when you decompress time and you give people resources, they tend to be very wasteful. How can we incorporate that into modern education? Modern education, including the proposed educational framework intended for the cleaners. Can the doctor assist quickly?
Well, if you looked at one of my first slides, there was time and space as an important element to look at. And I think that the fact is that, and maybe the analogy that I can give you is analog versus random access mode, which was a leap in our computer work. So that this perception of analog is the problem. The ability to train people to random access education. If I can put it, it's very primitive language, and I ask you to forgive me, but that is the way that people are talented. And if they are cleaners or if they're CEOs, you will find that they all have exactly the same capacity to learn. It is the mechanism of interface that counts. And yes, this is touched often by people who say, is it a Eurocentric education or an African-centric education? When I hear those arguments, I see problems with interface, because you can recognize, and I mean, Ronnie Lessem and the guys have got a fantastic kind of, also based on quadrants of north, south, east, and west, which I'm not going to keep the time going, but I'm hoping that even in that short bit, I've sort of answered what you wanted me to, Gibson. If not, I can carry on. But if you take Ronnie Lessem, and I'm really distilling it, he might even be offended I'm distilling it so far, but the northern kind of mentality is empirical, and they want to see the proof. And I always use water as my example. And people in the north would say, well, what is water? H2O, and they'll do the weight of the thing and the atoms and all that. When you move to the east, water acquires an esoteric nature of washing and of improving a spiritual sense. And down south here, we have to make a plan to get water. So we have a community-based way of solving our water problem. And I always make a joke of the fact that the Americans, there was this big expanse of water, and they said, well, let's get on a boat and see what's on the other side. So they were action-based. But the idea is to bring all four of those elements together so that we all share an education basis that is transmutable, translatable, and acceptable across all the different cultures and states of education, so that there cannot be a complex because one hasn't been through the analog of school where you can acquire the skills. I hope, Gibson, that gave you some sort of answer to your question.
Thank you, Gianni. I think that was a very good, and I think that's the balance. It's that sweet spot, a little bit of too much or not enough, or it's exactly that. So I fully agree, and I think it's important to have that balanced view. So I really appreciate your explanation to that.
Thank you.
Gianni, I think thank you very much. I think it was really an inspirational speak and a talk. And I think that a lot of people also need to process some of the information, because I really, for myself, for example, I think that a lot of the areas that you've discussed, I think take quite a lot of processing in terms of application to our own context. Prof. Klopper, is there anything else? I see people have commented. Thank you for all your comments. I will try to get to them, Gianni, as well, commenting on your presentation.
No, I'm good. Thank you, Marla. Thanks, Gianni.
Thanks. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you, Jackie.